You're listening to the FitMIND FitBODY podcast, where we explore the connection between running and positive mental health. We do this by talking to runners from all walks of life who generously share their experiences with us. So you don't miss an episode, I've created an email list for you to join. Check the show notes for more details. Without further ado, I'm your host, Michelle Frost. Let's get moving. Welcome to FitMIND FitBODY, where today's episode features the inspiring Brodie Sharpe, a physiotherapist who turned his athletic focus from basketball to mastering the art of running injury-free. Join us as Brodie shares his journey and invaluable insights into preventing and recovering from running injuries. Whether you're new to running or looking to enhance your practice, Brodie's expertise will guide you to a healthier, more enjoyable running experience. Let's dive in. Today on FitMIND FitBODY, I'm excited to introduce you all to Brodie Sharpe. Hello, Brodie.
Nice to meet you, Michelle.
Welcome to the podcast. You're actually the second person in 2 days that I've spoken to who also has a podcast. So that's really cool.
Excellent. Well, yeah, glad to jump on and have a chat.
Now let's start with where you grew up. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Haven't moved much. Melbourne, born and raised. I've now grew up on the west side of the city. Now I'm east, as I have a partner who grew up around this area. So I had to make the decision we bought a house and we had to decide where to go. And turns out it's east side, which I'm sort of getting used to and sort of learning the streets. But
Takes a while.
Melbourne's a good place to live.
It is. I was actually born there, and two of my two daughters both live in Melbourne. Although I grew up here in Tasmania. Whereabouts in what suburb are you in? You don't have to give us your address or anything. What suburb are you in on the east?
In the Rosanna, Heidelberg kind of area at the moment.
Yeah. Lovely. Yeah, as you said, Melbourne is lovely. I've also lived in Sydney. I quite like getting around in Melbourne. I find it much easier, especially if you don't have a car and you're not too far from the centre, getting around with the trams and stuff. It's great. So much better than many other places I've been. But that's a bit boring. Tell me about your childhood. What was that like growing up in the west of Melbourne?
Childhood was good. Athletically speaking, I grew up playing basketball, which was, from 5 years of age up until 25 years of age. Mm-hmm. I played quite competitively here in Melbourne. And then once that career sort of finished, that's when I actually transferred into running and triathlons and those sorts of things. But upbringing was pretty nice. Had a twin brother, or still have a twin brother that we were just menaces, and had a younger sister who, got the short end of the stick. We were just picking on her all the time. But typical upbringing.
Is your brother also sporty?
He's very sporty. Also grew up playing basketball. Our whole family did, really. And extremely close. He's actually moved up to Queensland he lives on Magnetic Island, out of all places. Wow. But he's been living there for 2 years or so, but we'll be back in Melbourne shortly. But yeah, very close. We've got a very close family.
Are you identical or not identical?
We are identical. Yet you can tell us apart, genetically speaking, identical, but there are some subtle differences.
But life has made you not as identical.
Correct.
Well, actually, I'm one of my mum's had 5 children. One died at birth, but I'm the only one who's not a twin. She had an identical set and a non-identical set, so it's kind of interesting.
Whoa.
In our life. Yeah.
Wow, never heard of that.
Yeah, it was quite unusual, and that was a long time ago, a lot longer before you were born. So obviously the basketball element kept you guys moving together as a family and, driving around to all the different, I assume, stadiums in Melbourne to do that. So your parents must have been well on board for you all to be so sporty. Did they play sport as well? Were they also into basketball?
My mum's side of the family was very much into basketball. That's sort of what got us into it. And my dad was very much wanting Australian rules football, but he got in too late. We already had basketball pretty ingrained into us.
Yeah.
And despite some attempts to get us to play, didn't really like it as much. It didn't really stick. And so, yeah, he was a very athletic football upbringing.
Yeah.
But the basketball itself was pretty ingrained pretty early on, and so we just stuck to that.
Can you remember what running was like for you at school? You know how we have to do school carnival and cross country and things like that. Do you remember what you thought about running as a kid?
Didn't really think much about it, to
Mm.
be fair. Didn't really do track, didn't really do anything like that. If I was at a school carnival and I mainly gravitated, like on my high school days, I gravitated towards like triple jump.
Yeah.
Because I could jump pretty high, I had pretty much like some good explosive qualities,
Hmm.
and we had to like pick an event to do, and so I picked triple jump without even really knowing much about what it was or how good it was. And I ended up winning that and then went to like whatever the zones the next level was and then just got outbeaten. But I mainly gravitate towards those. So for running itself, I'm like, I just watched them running around the track. Didn't interest me, didn't really do
Yeah.
much. So yeah, I was very much a late bloomer when it came to running, as most people are like these days, like with COVID and all that sort of stuff, a lot of people, middle-aged people picked up running. And so
Yeah.
it's not uncommon that it's picked up later in life, which I can relate very much so.
So you went to uni, and I mean, I haven't actually told people what you do on your podcast or what your podcast is about yet. So, but they'll soon find out. You went to uni, oh,
Yes.
I assume, because I know what
Yes.
you now do. Did you do that straight from school?
So after graduating high school, I did a year of sports science and
Yeah.
then transferred into physiotherapy. And
Yeah.
so year 12, sort of like I worked hard, but I didn't work that smart.
Hmm.
Um, so it was, yeah, I was very happy with how I did there, but not good enough to get into physio. Didn't
Yeah.
even consider doing physio because of how high of a mark was
Had to have.
required.
Hmm.
But yeah, worked hard first year of uni, transferred over and just loved it ever since.
That's awesome. What? So is it when you were at uni that you got into running,
So
or were you still playing basketball?
it was after my basketball career. So I sort of I was probably after graduating. Yeah, it was well after graduating. So
Okay.
I graduated and about 2 or 3 years into my physio career was
Hmm.
when I actually decided to start doing some sort of running. So I was still playing basketball
Yeah.
um, up until like my mid to late 20s, maybe
Yeah.
about 26.
Oh, wow.
Um, and so that was when that career ended, and then I had to find something else to do. I actually went traveling in North America for 6 months with one of my best mates, and
Awesome.
it was, a lot of beer, a lot of just like slack sort of, yes, moving around a lot, doing a lot of walking and
Yeah.
sightseeing and all that sort of stuff, but also a lot of partying. And I was just extremely unfit when I got home after 6 months of traveling, and probably the worst shape I've ever been,
Yeah.
and needed something to do. And so the basketball career, I wasn't going to go back to tryouts and do all that sort of stuff. I sort of felt that part of my life was um, that chapter had closed and was
Hmm.
just trying to look for the next thing.
Okay. And you somehow decided running was it? Or was that just the easiest thing to do at the time, do you think, or the simplest?
Well, at that time, I got home from travels, and my sister was training for a half marathon, which
Uh,
we've never really been much into running, much into distance stuff. But she is really one to require accountability or looking for
hmm.
accountability, doesn't
Hmm.
like doing stuff on her own, and asked if I wanted to do it with her. And so I agreed, and we started training for this half marathon together. And that's sort of what sparked it. I think that's what ignited the catching the run bug and never left.
So how long ago was that?
If would I have to try to put a year onto it? It was probably about 10 years ago.
Okay.
Um, maybe a bit less, but
Yeah.
yeah, it just sparked not only like a passion for mine, but it actually sparked a career that I'm now found myself in.
That's amazing. It really
Yeah.
is. It's so good. And do you thank your sister all the time for that?
Well, she likes because I do mention my origin story and that sort of stuff on my podcast and being interviewed on other podcasts. And
Mhm.
she does listen to them and she does enjoy hearing that. That's what sort of it stemmed a lot in terms of the passion that I have throughout life and my career and my, you know, everything. But so she does like hearing
It's
about it. She does like
everything.
reminding me
She's
about it.
responsible for everything, for
Yes,
all of the
yes.
things that are good in your life.
I don't like to say it that way, but it's kind of true.
Oh, I love that. I love sibling stuff. It's so complex. The way, how do we treat it? Um, so where did you go after that? So you did this half marathon with your
Yep.
sister, and you decided this was actually something that could replace basketball. It's not a team sport, though, running
Yeah.
so much. I mean, it can be felt as a team sport, and a lot of people that I've talked to say they started running for some kind of physical reason. In some ways, like you, like they wanted to get fitter for some reason they weren't fit at that time. But they stay because of the people that they meet. So it's not a team sport, but often there is that element of the people that you surround yourself with when you start
Yeah.
running. Why do you
And
think you? Yeah, sorry, you go.
I was going to say the energy of race day is kind of like
Mm,
more community of a feel as well.
mm,
Like we were doing park runs during our training. Most of my runs was on my own, and I do enjoy working out on my own.
yeah.
I don't really need any motivation or accountability and that sort of stuff. At the
Mm,
moment, I'm training for like a high rocks event, which is sort of like a CrossFit type event, but I'm
oh
mainly
wow.
just training by myself.
Yeah.
And seem to enjoy it, seem to keep motivation, seems to be something that I'm inherently okay doing. So running was okay in that sense of getting out by myself,
Hmm.
getting some fresh air, maybe listening to a podcast or an audio book,
Yeah.
or even just tuning into nature, getting by some running water and running along that.
Yeah.
Like those sorts of things I was looking forward to doing, even if it's just on
Yeah.
my own. But then we would do park runs on weekends and have this huge community feel. And then on race day, I'd just be buzzing with the event itself being
Mm,
so energized. And that element as well really helped, prepare for something
hmm.
as big as that. And so, yeah, there was a few other elements that really ticked the box to sort of keep my enjoyment, keep my
Mm.
passion, and keep me committed
Motivated.
to such a sport.
Mm.
Yeah.
So what sort of events have you done in the last 10 years, Brodie?
So the half marathon that my sister and I were training for
Hmm.
was during the Melbourne Marathon Festival.
Yep. Hmm.
And so there's a half marathon version of that. And while I was training, my sister was sort of getting better, improving her running, but I was ramping up my fitness above that, sort of
Hmm.
exceeding that. And quickly within a few months, built up to a half marathon distance and was wanting just to continue a little bit more motivation because I didn't want to
Hmm.
get up to a half marathon distance and think, well, the marathon's, 3 months away. Do I just stay at this distance? So I actually
Yeah.
changed my distance for that half marathon into a full marathon and
Wow.
did a half marathon 2 months prior to that, just to prepare.
Yeah.
Knowing what I know now, that was probably a bit too hasty, but
Hmm.
because injuries are a big part of being a runner. But so since then, I did one half marathon, then did the full marathon, then decided to stick to some half marathons. I thought they were a bit more fun. Didn't need a lot
Hmm.
of training, but was also that distance where it's kind of challenging, but not as grueling as a full length distance.
Hmm.
Did a couple of those, traveled into Europe, did a couple in Switzerland, which
Awesome.
was really nice. Did one in Belgium, which was really nice. Then got back home and started doing some shorter trail
Hmm.
runs. Really found the enjoyment for trail runs and the community feel around that.
Yeah.
Then I switched to triathlons, triathlons for a couple of years, just some fun
Yeah.
events. And yeah, for the most part of like well, since COVID, so the best part of 4 years, I haven't really taken part in any events.
Yeah.
Just running for enjoyment, just
Hmm.
enjoying helping runners run pain free. But like I say, I do have another fitness style event coming up, which does involve a lot of running,
Yeah.
which is in 3 months from now. So only just recently decided to get the competitive edge again and start training for something.
So the thing that you're about to do, could you explain that? I hadn't heard of it, I don't think.
Not many people have,
Mm.
but most people will pretty soon. It's very, very new, pretty big in the UK. It's only been here for 1 year in
Oh,
Australia,
wow.
and so it's called High Rocks,
Yep.
and it's HYROX,
I'll write
and
that down.
it's
Hmm.
eight fitness stations, you could
Hmm.
say, and each workout station is segmented, or in between each of those workout stations is a 1 kilometer run. So
Okay.
you start with a kilometer run, then you have to do a ski erg machine. You do that
Hmm.
for um, a kilometer, I think it is. Then you go for another run, and then you do a sled push, you do a sled pull, you do uh, broad-based burpee jumps, you
Yep.
do wall balls, you do lunges, farmer's carry, a whole bunch of things in between these 1K runs. And so it's sort of this mixture of, you need to be really strong, you need to
Yeah.
have a really big cardiovascular sort of fitness, you need to be like fit as a runner. And so a lot of people, you have like triathletes try and do it,
Hmm.
and they just get burnt out with the squats and the lunges
Mm.
and those sorts of things that are required. But then you have these big CrossFitters that just fall apart when it comes to so much running.
It's a
And
good
so
cardio.
it's a good blend of everything, and
Wow.
sort of fits what goals and fitness accomplishments I want to achieve, like
Hmm.
moving forward, just for longevity and in general. Because yes, you being a runner is nice, doing marathons, but when you get into older age, you want strength, you want sort of
Mm.
muscle bulk for general health and wellness, good bone
Mm.
density and all that sort of stuff. You want a higher VO2 max. You want to be able to sprint. You want to be able to push things, pull things, do some body weight stuff. And this particular type of event seems to encapsulate a lot of my fitness motivations. What I want to do. I
Yeah.
want to be fit. I want to
Yeah.
run fast. I want to run far. I want to do things. I want to squat heavy. I want to
Hmm.
deadlift heavy. I want to lunge heavy and all
Hmm.
that sort of stuff. And so encapsulates all those things.
That's amazing. I love it. Like, this is the only reason I have a podcast, so I can learn about all these new things.
There you go.
Like, it was on the podcast that I learned around about backyard ultras. I'd never heard of
Ah, yes.
this.
Yeah, very good.
So again, the podcast person I had on yesterday has a podcast about backyard ultras. So I learned a lot more
Excellent.
about that. So it's fascinating. Wow. It sounds like yeah, a mixture of some of those circuit type of events that I've heard of in the past. I can't remember the name of them, but crossed with like obstacle course type of thing, even
Yeah.
though there's not obstacles that you're going
Yeah.
over or under, but you're having to do things as you
Funny
go.
that you mentioned that, because that was actually something that I wanted to look at.
Mhm.
Looking for like an event. I'm like, do I want to do a running thing? Because
Mm.
I've got a 8-month-old baby, and I'm
Oh,
like, okay, well, the last year has been, you know, sort of just a whirlwind of home
baby
commitments,
stuff.
that sort of stuff. But now things are settling down. I'm like, what event do I want to go towards? And actually started looking at obstacle course races and Spartan
Mm.
races and all that
Mm.
sort of stuff. And I'm like, okay, do I want to try to do that? But then I found this High Rocks thing and saw
Mm.
that was new to Melbourne. This is the second year they're hosting it, and it was a
Yeah.
big success last year. One of my clients was actually a High Rocks competitor in the States.
Oh, wow.
And that's when I first got introduced to that last year.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, yeah, this is for me. Like, I saw the Spartan and the obstacle course race, and they're all covered in mud, and they're like trying to run mud. I'm like, maybe I just want to stick to the strength fitness challenge
Yeah.
rather than actually, you know, army crawling into some dirty water and trying to
Mm.
run 10Ks. I don't know if that really interests me.
Yeah. It's funny that I love the fact that there are so many different types of events out there, like that I've never heard of, that we haven't ever heard of, that appeal to lots of different people. So there's something for everyone, I
For
guess.
sure.
So cool.
Absolutely.
So what do you think motivates you? I was going to ask you that before. It was in my head, and then you said something about um, you went for quite a period of not entering any events per se, and now you've just sort of shuffled in that direction now. What do you think motivates you to keep moving then? Because it's not necessarily an event. You don't necessarily have to have an event in order to train for something, by the sound of it.
Yeah. I am just in a fitness habit. Like, I just like the feeling of exercising and know that I need to be sensible to avoid injuries. But
Mm.
last 4 years is a great example of I don't need any event. I just get out and go for a run, 5K 2 or 3 times during the week, and then a long run would be like a 10 to 12K.
Yeah.
And I could just continue doing that for the rest of my life. I don't know what the motivation is
Mhm.
apart from love, feeling like the enjoyment of exercise, getting
Yeah.
out there and listening to a podcast and sort of building some knowledge that way, switching it off every now and then, listening to the birds and getting
Mhm.
into nature.
Mm.
And uh, it's just a habit. Like I feel like if I wasn't to exercise for a few days in a row, I feel like a slob. It's just like, I don't know,
Mm.
this habit just drills into you over years and years that it's just part of your life, and I really enjoy it. And it's um, you know, trying to the identity of being a runner and then helping runners and then learning more about running,
Mm.
it ties really well with my career. So
Mhm.
that sort of has a bit more of a solidified an attachment, I guess. But
Mm.
yeah, more than happy just to exercise because I like the feeling of it and want to continue doing it.
Tell us a little bit more. Like I was going to ask later, but I'll ask now. Tell us a bit more about your practice and how it has become such a big part of what not just your hobby, but what you do as a physiotherapist.
So I was a physio for about 3 or 4 years before I became a runner.
Hmm.
And once I became a runner, and then I started seeing runners in clinics. So I was a physiotherapist just working at a general practice,
Hmm.
just seeing anyone under the sun. But as soon as I became a runner and then I had an injured runner come in, I was just buzzing all day. I was like, all right, let's try and get you back to pain-free running. What goals do you have? What's your running shoes? Like, really found myself it was building up a lot of my energy
Mm.
and I was just buzzing for the rest of the day whenever I'd see a runner in clinic.
Hmm.
And so did a bit of, self-reflection of there was other types of clients that I'd see in clinics that I was sort of getting bored of. You'd see a lot of lower backs, a lot of neck pain, a lot of like work cover patients who didn't really want to get better, but was just going through the motions and they would kind of, deplete some of my
Hmm.
energy throughout the day. And I'm like, was it at that stage where throughout that time, I was working and seeing runners for about 4 years in that clinic. And I'm like, maybe there's something to me trying to spend more time around clients that, build up my energy rather
Yeah.
than the clients that deplete my energy. And wouldn't that be exciting? Wouldn't that be a good life
What a way
passion
to
and
live.
things to follow? Yeah, exactly. And so I started thinking about doing my own clinic, branching out and sort of starting from scratch, working for
Yeah.
myself and just seeing runners, like niching
Hmm.
down, just seeing
Yeah.
runners. And we're sort of looking at how much it would cost, what's the, pros and cons of
Mm.
venturing out on your own. And then one of my new physios that started off at that clinic was like, why don't you do an online practice? Why don't you do an online physio clinic? And no one had heard of that at that stage.
Wow.
But that person in particular was doing a men's health online physio
Hmm.
clinic alongside working in person with me. And so he sort of sparked that idea in me. And then it just became so obvious that um, why not, give it a go? Why not try to open up an online physio clinic where you are seeing people around the world, all
Hmm.
types of runners, and most of the overloaded chronic injuries don't require a lot of hands-on therapy.
Mm.
And a lot
No,
of the
no
runners that eventually
massaging.
see
Mm.
me are, you know, 3 months of ITB pain or
Yeah.
6 months of knee pain or
So,
2 years of high
yes,
hamstring
yes.
pain. Yeah.
Funny.
And the manual therapy becomes less and less relevant as the
Mm.
injury becomes more and more prolonged. What you need
Hmm.
is exercise prescription, you need
Yeah.
a good running program, you need good
Yeah.
advice about what aggravates and eases these
Hmm.
particular types of injuries, and people can get a lot better with self-management
Mm.
strategies. And
Yeah.
that's sort of where the research points to. And
Mm.
um, manual therapy sort of provides a good pain relief for acute sort
Yeah.
of pain, provided it's just in the short term, but the short term effects help you, I guess, enhances your ability to do the long-term
Yeah.
stuff, which is
Yeah.
strengthening, which is getting back to running and that
Hmm.
sort of stuff. So they do tie in well in the acute setting. Um, So that's when I ventured out and tried to do that. I worked for 6 months part-time at the clinic that I had been working at,
Yeah.
and sort of had this agreement where I could sort of transition over. So
Hmm.
I'd work part-time for myself, part-time with that clinic. And then after 6 months, moved on to working full-time for myself. And that's when the podcast came along, because while I was um, helping runners online, I was also creating and producing a podcast to help runners overcome their injuries and learn more about running and learn more about the science and learn more about
Yeah.
knee pain and preventing and increasing your running
Hmm.
performance safely and doing all of those sorts of things. And that really picked up traction in terms of viewership, and
Hmm.
really generates almost all of my business. That all the leads that I get for my clients are just people listen to the podcast and say, "You've helped me with everything else. You've helped me do XYZ just by
Hmm.
listening to your episodes. Now I have this really stubborn injury. I
Hmm.
need your help. I know you're the person that I want to go to because I've been listening to you. I know your philosophy. I know
Yeah.
how evidence-based you are with the people that you've interviewed. Help me with this injury." And so it really ties in well with the business. And like I say, generates a lot of energy. I
Mm.
have done this for probably 6 years. Not one day do I have an inkling of burnout when seeing clients,
Wow.
because I generate so much energy working with runners, helping runners, teaching runners.
Yeah.
And I've sort of worked my way into a niche and a passion that encapsulates the exercise side of things and also my
Yeah.
career side of things.
That is so good. I love that. So the podcast you started that like what was that 4 or 5 years ago? Is that what
Yeah.
you were saying? Yeah.
Yep. Pretty much
Yeah.
around the time I started the online business.
Hmm. That's amazing. It's kind of like it talking from a marketing perspective, it's kind of like a really good case study because that niche is really tight. And then when you talk about podcasts and what they can do to help grow an audience and develop the relationship between you and your audience, which you then have something to be able to help them with, at the practice on from that. And it's only when we build those relationships that that you can take it, a client or whatever to that next level often. And the
Yeah.
podcast is a perfect vehicle for building
Yeah.
relationships.
I have I
So
have
that's great.
two case studies that can help like
Mm,
work out well, at least emphasize the power of niching down. So yes,
mm,
I've niched down just to seeing runners.
mm,
And so when an injured runner is looking for a physio, they have the option, okay, I can see an in-person physio
mm,
who's like this generic physio that can still do hands-on therapy and can do all those sorts of
mm,
things. But I also have the option of this online guy that I've been listening to who specializes in runners, and they make the decision there.
yeah.
Um, and a lot of the runners that I do see, they've been through the ringer of seeing in person,
Mm,
and it hasn't really helped to have been that effective in whatever particular way.
yeah.
But so that's generated a lot of business. Fantastic. Niching down really works. But I've since, over the last couple of years, niched down even further with another podcast that not many people know about because it is
Oh.
so niche. Um, there's a specific type of condition called proximal hamstring tendinopathy. It's like
Mhm,
uh, a, a your tendon that attaches from your hamstring that attaches up into your sit bone. That can be that can get irritated, can get
mhm.
really nasty and really hard to overcome. A lot of misinformation about that
Feel
out there
like I
about
have
this.
that. Just want to throw that in there.
Okay, yeah.
Anyway, keep going.
um, and so a lot of the runners that I was treating had this, we
Mhm,
call it PHT, is like the acronym. And I decided like so many people have this. It's so puzzling. There are Facebook groups, thousands of people with
mm,
this condition, and they don't know what to do. Let me start another podcast where it's called the Overcome Proximal Hamstring Tendinopathy podcast, which is a mouthful. Um, but I've done that for a couple of years, and I've since like niched down to just teaching people how to overcome
Oh,
what
wow.
the research shows, what are the misconceptions about this particular condition.
Hmm.
And I have got a flood of clients from that very niche podcast, only 500, 600 people listen to it, like per episode. But
Yeah.
I have generated so much business from that particular podcast because it is so niche, because people are desperately looking for answers. They've had this for years. And that's when you're looking at back to the running physio, they need to make the decision of, do I see this online running physio or do I see this generic in-person physio? They now have, do I see this in-person health professional that really doesn't have an idea about PHT? I'll be fair, like in the general health sense, not many people know how to treat this, and it's often misguided, and they just say stretch and do some bodyweight bridges and that sort of stuff, which it gets people nowhere. Or I have this online therapist that specializes in PHT that has 100+ podcast episodes on how to treat this and what the evidence shows and that sort of stuff. That is a no-brainer for a lot of people, and that's why I've got so many people, so many leads. And so niching even further down, I have more clients with this PHT podcast than I ever do with my Run Smarter podcast, despite my Run Smarter podcast having 10 times the amount of viewers. So niching down, it's a good thing to think about. If anyone who else is listening to this and have some business ideas or how they want to venture it, there's 2 kind of studies about niching down even further to become even more successful.
I love that. I mean, I've been doing online business stuff. This is completely away from running in a way for a long time. And that is one of the big things that I have taught as a coach and a business mentor. When it comes to doing it yourself, it is so hard though, in that, because as even you pointed out then, I've got a lot more people who watch my more generic, even though it's still quite niche, running podcast about running injury, and then but only a few people listen to the more specific hamstring one. But it's more effective in creating clients because, as you said, it's like, wouldn't you go to the person who's specifically talking directly to your issue, whatever that issue is? And so I just love that, and it's what I'm always trying to do for myself, and I'm not very good at it, but I'm really good at giving advice to other people to do it. And it's great to see case studies where it's worked really well. I just love it. I just love it. I have to talk to you about podcasting and how you get lots more people to listen as well. Anyway, back to running. All of that's amazing. I'll be listening to that other podcast because I'm pretty sure that's what I've got, a bit of hamstring tendinopathy.
We can have a chat afterwards.
Comes and goes. I have to go listen to a podcast. I will put links to both of those, of course, in this episode as well. It's just amazing. Anyway, back to you running a little bit. Tell me a little bit about when running has been really helpful in your life. So when other things are going on in your life, whether business is getting really tough, there's stuff going on in personal life, and you've been able to go for a run and that's been helpful. Can you think of a time when that's been the case?
I'm not really much a stressful person. I know like a lot of my clients, they run for mental health. It's like their escape, which is really tricky when they're injured and they can't run, because you've got this scenario where, okay, I have, I'm, I'm in pain. So no one likes being in pain, but also my outlet has now been taken away from me because I'm injured and I can't run. And so they do one of 2 things. They either don't run and they're in a really miserable,
bad place,
sort of, emotional state, or they just try and they just run with an injury and they just, it gets worse and never resolves. I have, like, these days, like I say, I have an 8-month-old daughter. I think in the throes of being a new parent and all the sleeping challenges, feeding challenges, and all those scenarios, I think getting away and just going for a run is really nice to have a bit of peace and quiet, really nice to have a bit of time to yourself to have a think. And a lot of my business ideas and, just overall just thoughts just tend to happen when I run. So it's always good to get away and just think, because I do like thinking. I very rarely unwind, but in saying that, I don't really, I'm very much like a, I would say, positive person. I have a big positive outlook on life and stuff, and so stress doesn't really get to me that much. What does get to me is like ideas and getting excited about certain business ventures and that sort of stuff. And so when those sort of things are going on, I don't get a lot of sleep. I struggle to unwind in those scenarios rather than stress actually being a part of that. But I think just getting out for a run when there's a bit of chaos going on in the house,
Mm.
thinking to yourself, just getting some time to listen to some podcasts, come up with some ideas, write them down on my phone while I'm running, and then just like come back and feel a bit better that you've not only taken some time to think,
Hmm.
got some ideas, but you're also doing some exercise. And so always feel good after a run, how my legs and body feels after a run, because I know it's doing me a world of good.
Is there ever a time when that thinking, because being an entrepreneur myself for many years too, have that same, I often get great ideas when I'm out running. My point being, sometimes those ideas, when I see them and I'm not running, when I finish running and I write them down, they're not always the best ideas. Especially if I've run for like a long time, because I do a lot of distance running. So if I've run for a long time, it's almost like the oxygen to my brain has reduced because it's all going to my limbs, and therefore the ideas that I think are brilliant on a long run are not that brilliant when I get back. I don't know what the distance be interesting study. What is the distance where
Your
the
ideas
ideas
just
that
get
you
worse
have,
and
yeah,
worse.
exactly, where the ideas are great, and then I don't know, suddenly you've gone to 13.5K and now they're all a bit they seem awesome, but they're not that awesome.
I
I don't
have
know
had
if
a
you
couple
get that.
of moments when I have an idea and like because I jot it down in like notes or
Mm-hmm.
something,
Mm-hmm.
I'm quite brief with the idea. I don't want to write it all out while I'm
Yeah.
running. So I just
Yeah.
write down two or three words and then I'll get back and then I'll read them and like, what was that
What
doesn't even make
the?
sense. And then I forget about the idea because my shorthand is just so off the point. It says something like, purple shoes or something like that. That's an idea that I had. And then like I'll be like, what did I even mean? And so I've had a couple of those. So I have to be very intentional about when I write down my ideas, being able to remember it later,
Yeah.
I've had
Have
to
you
learn the hard way.
have you tried audio? Have you tried like leaving
No,
yourself
I
an
haven't
audio note?
actually.
That might
No,
that might help that maybe.
good idea. Yeah, because then I can
Um,
rant a little bit.
and the deep breathing while you're going, trying to catch your breath while you're going might be just hard to hear. Who knows? Um, we you mentioned to me in the past that you've had a bunch of injuries yourself. Is
Yep.
that's the case? How have you dealt with it? Because you did touch on it before, and we often talk about identity in this podcast and how to deal with it when you do have an injury, especially if your identity is so tied into being a runner. How do you deal with that when you do have an injury?
Yeah. I think definitely in my early days, I was a lot more injury prone.
Mm,
I've been a lot smarter, practiced what I've preached a lot. Even just my understanding about running has continued to grow in the past, even just 4, 5 years.
hmm.
And I've done the mistakes. I've ran too much, too far, too fast,
Yeah.
tried to prepare for races too quickly,
Hmm.
and just brings you undone a lot. Um, I've never really struggled with a loss of identity.
Hmm.
I've never been derailed too much with an
Hmm.
injury that has required me to stop running for too long.
Yeah.
But even if it is like a week or two off, I do replace it with
Another.
cardio. I like to
Hmm.
bike ride. I like to do gym. And so there's something there that's an outlet for me.
Hmm.
I know a lot of my clients, they only just want to run. And so when that's taken away, they don't really have any other options. And that's a challenge.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you become. I always talk about my injuries on the podcast. I actually talk about how I'm reducing my risk of injuries
Hmm.
on the podcast as well as I'm preparing for this high rocks thing. I just did a recent podcast episode on everything that I'm trying to put in place because I know there's a lot of new exercises on there. I know it's pretty intense. I know that um, my risk of injury is going
Hmm.
to increase with everything that you any challenge that you embark upon.
Yeah.
But this is what I'm doing currently to mitigate or lower those risks as much as possible, knowing there's always going to be
Hmm.
some risk there. And every time there's some little niggle that pops up, this is how I'm proactively addressing that while still remaining
Yeah.
as fit as possible. It just makes it a bit more relatable, I think. I also did a podcast series about all of my injuries and what I've learned from them. I've had a bout of plantar fasciitis. I've had knee pain. I've had this high hamstring tendinopathy. I've had that in the past that persisted for quite a long time.
Yeah.
Um, and can't really remember your question, but I'm just chiming on here. I think it makes people quite relatable when they talk about their own
Yeah.
pitfalls and blind spots and what you're sort of doing and growing from it. Because
Mm.
the thing about running is people are so like the prevalence of injuries in the running population is so
Mm.
high,
Mm-hmm.
which is again a good business to be in. But it's mainly due to training errors. And so
Yeah.
there's a lot of education that we can do to ourselves to help guide just safer waters and you know, explain my own experiences and how I've sort of
Mm.
learned those lessons of what I'm doing differently moving forward is always gives a little bit more of a relatable sense.
Yeah, yeah. No, I love that. And that's exactly what I was talking about, really, is that what happens when you have an injury and how you kind of deal with it. I know that you've had injuries, and so being able to relate that to your clients, I think is useful. One of the things that struck me then when you were talking a few years ago, I had a coach who's in the Netherlands, and they're called the 9 Mile Club, and they try and get people who are age group runners to the start of a marathon without being injured. And they do that because that exactly what you were just saying then is that so many people, especially as we get a bit older and maybe people are doing it as a bucket list type of thing, they want to do a marathon or whatever. But often they're injured by the time they get to the line because of the way it's not really uh, the training packages or the training programs that are out there. It's not shouldn't be a one size fits all, and yet no matter your age or your experience, everyone's doing a similar kind of program where they ramp up until they've done their 36 or whatever, and then do a bit of tapering. Instead, they try and get you to do not much more than about 9 miles. That's why it's called 9 Mile Club. So about 18 or 19 kilometers, and a lot of it is slow and a lot of it's heart rate. But then you do like one quality session a week where you do a little bit of speed work. Um, and there's a bunch of things you do in order strength work and some things to do with running on tired legs. So you sort of replicate some of that. But it's interesting, like that is in order to try and stop them getting to that start line already injured as runners. So like there's sort of a correlation with what you were saying there with the injuries that we all seem to get because it's such an
Definitely.
injury prone sport in some ways. Although another thing I like to talk about is that we're all born to run. Like we're all made to run because genetically our ancestors either ran or were eaten, so or didn't catch enough food. So genetically, those of us who are here, our ancestors all were part of the ones who were quite good at running because they could get away from the saber-toothed tiger or whatever was chasing them.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that we are prone to running. And is that because prone to running injuries? Is that because we're so sedentary now? Like our lifestyle is quite sedentary. Is that part of the reason that we're so prone, do you think? I don't know.
I would say it is the people underestimate how strong or how patient and sensible you need to be with your running.
Mm.
And a lot of people say, like my case, oh, I started running. Oh, let me do a marathon in 10 months' time, just
Mm-hmm.
starting from scratch.
Yeah.
Not long enough, too short. You need more
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
My running was too fast. Like every time I went out, I tried to get a PB. Like I'd run four
Mm-hmm.
or five Ks. Let me try and go a little bit faster every time.
Mm.
Wrong way to go about it.
Yeah.
Um, People, when they run, most of their running is a bit too hard. And so
Mm-hmm.
they get overloaded. Um, it can all boil down to people training beyond their capacity to adapt. Because what
Mm-hmm.
you want to do is you want to train within your adaptation zone and have enough recovery on the back end to adapt to that stimulus. And that particular cycle is being thrown off with either too much training too
Mm.
quickly or not enough recovery. And so people get these overloaded injuries. And so,
Yeah.
yes, it could be we are maybe a more sedentary population, but it's just that
Mm.
introduction back into running or that start of a run, people are too hasty. People
Eager.
aren't patient. Yeah. Yep. They're motivated or they see other runners and they see how fast they're running or how far they're running or how many days they're running.
Mm.
And they try to mimic that. It's too much. And if you do too much too soon, you end up with
Yep.
these overuse
Injuries.
injuries.
Mm. I have a funny story relating to that. My daughter who lives in Melbourne has just gone through a big fitness thing and got fit and lost a lot of weight. And went going to the gym 3 or 4 times a week and doing lots of things. And then she decided she's going to do a 50K trail run back here in Tasmania,
Wow.
which she has just completed, I'll say. But the interesting, funny bit was she got some advice about how to ramp up. She used to run when she was younger. She's now like almost 30. Um, she hadn't run for a long time. But for the last sort of 6 months, her training for this was just to add 10% to each week to the distance. And then I said to her about 6 weeks out, so what are you up to now, like distance wise on your long run? I'm about to do a 42. I'm about to run a marathon in fact, I think it was going to be a 43 or something. And her longest had been a 38 at that point. I'm like, I think you can slow down now because you don't need to get, all the way to that 50K
Yeah.
distance in order to run the 50K. But I guess she hasn't got an injury apart from her toenails and things. But I think partly because she was doing a lot of gym work, so there was a lot of strength. So she
Yeah.
would not getting those kind of injuries that those of us who just do mostly running tend to get because the strength in some of those muscles and ligaments is perhaps not there for the amount of load that we're putting on. And I'm probably using all the wrong terminology and I apologize.
You're doing very well.
I assume that is the case. Anyway, I just thought it was interesting that if I hadn't said that, probably by the time she'd got to the actual start of the race, she would have done like a 60 something because she was just
Well,
going to
that's
keep
it. It's the idea.
increasing by
Like
10%.
most people are familiar with the 10% rule.
Mm,
Like you should be increasing your overall mileage by 10% week by week to avoid being overloaded, but
yeah.
has its limitations. Like if people are starting from scratch and they can only run 15 minutes,
Yeah.
how long is it going to take before you're actually getting into some significant, it's going to take you
Yeah.
forever. But
Yeah.
then you've got that other scale where people are doing
Mm,
very, very high volumes. That 10% rule puts you into overload risk
mm,
because, 10% is 10% and
yeah.
there are limitations to that. But I'd say like, yes, your daughter probably has a lot of strength from a
Mm,
gym sort of background,
mhm,
but also probably starting with that 10% in the early days has probably
mm,
built a fair bit of foundation for her to adapt as being a runner.
yeah.
So she's probably getting a good adaptation zone for the bulk part of her training. But like you say, that very tip of the spear at the very end, that 10% might have just slowly ticked over into being a little bit too much. But yeah, it's good that there's been some success there. And the real idea, like when you're talking about the training programs for people,
Mm,
most of it's quite static, but it actually needs to be a little bit flexible in someone's training
mm,
program because
mm,
not only does every individual change and the requirements change, and the idea would be to start with a template of how to train for a marathon, but then adapt and be flexible based on how your body is responding. So you might need to back off here and there. You might find increasing by 15% some weeks is actually fine because you're recovering quite well and you're sleeping quite well and you're eating quite well and you can get away with it
mm,
and your body feels quite fresh and energized. But there might be weeks where you're not sleeping as well, or you do have a lot of stress at work, or your body is feeling a little bit stiff and sore and you might need to back off more. And so everyone has unique lives, unique bodies, different responses to training. And so we need to really be flexible in that sense rather than just being very rigid and stubborn. And I don't care if I have knee pain. My training plan says a 15K long run, I'm going to do that. And that's why people get a bit stuck.
yeah, I'm a bit guilty of that.
We all
but
are. Like,
but
that's
my
why
training
runners are
plan
stubborn.
says I want
Yep.
to do it.
Yep.
I want to do it.
Yep.
That kind of
Even
thing.
though like the bulk of my job is building training plans for people, and I specifically say to them, based on how you're feeling, this is what we should do.
Mm,
This training plan is kind of like a speed limit. Like you can go under the speed limit and be fine. You can't go over a speed limit because then you get a fine.
mm,
And get fined, be fine. Poor choices there. You you get a ticket and you get penalized for going past the speed limit, and you can be totally safe going underneath the speed limit. So this is a training plan where you feel free if you feel like there's too
yeah,
much
risk it.
stress or whatever. Yeah, you can back off a bit.
Yeah.
And we all have to tune into our bodies a bit and see what's acceptable and what isn't, rather than just following a strict plan. And even I specifically say that to people, and they still want to follow the plan. They still feel guilty about not ticking off the boxes. It's
Yeah.
just like where runners are this type A personality where they
Yeah.
have something in front of them that they
Yeah.
want to do. And that's
Yeah.
why runners get injured. It's one of the reasons why it's so prevalent amongst this population.
Yeah. I'm recovering a bit from a run at the moment from a a big run, and my coach has put into my training program. Like yesterday, it was an hour of cross training, and she said in brackets, "Do not run." It's not a run. I still had to do my 2K run because I'm on a streak at the moment, but I wasn't allowed to do, like a 1 hour run. So she had to be very prescriptive. Leslie said, I'm one of those type
Smart.
of people. She said, "Do not run." So I went paddling instead. I wanted to ask you, it was really interesting, all of that, really helpful. I'm sure a lot of people are going to get a lot out of what you just said. How do you track that stuff? Like you as the individual and as that runner, you talked about tracking your feeling and how your body's going and how you're feeling at the time. Is there anything you recommend, like journaling or because for me, I go for a run and after a day or so, probably a lot of that stuff is lost, apart from I can see the statistics in Strava or whatever. I know that I went, but I won't necessarily recall that my left knee was sore or I felt crap or whatever. I won't necessarily recall that kind of stuff. I might be
Definitely if there's
forgetful.
symptoms, I would want to make sure that I document those. Like I have my clients just write it down on their spreadsheet. Like I create
Yeah.
training plans in a spreadsheet and
Mhm.
they just leave comments. Symptoms aside though, I definitely track my workload so that
Yeah.
I can see that I'm sensible week by week, session by session, and those sorts of
Mhm.
things. Um, and how I do that at the moment is I'll just have an internal perception of my rate of effort.
Mhm.
So between 1 and 10, 10's max out effort. My 2 is probably just this really easy run that I can do for hours and hours and hours.
Mhm.
Um, well, that'd probably be a 2 or 3 for me.
Mhm.
Um, and I will multiply my average effort for that session by the amount of minutes that I'm running. So
Mhm.
if I or just like a general workout. So if I worked out for 50 minutes, if I did a 50-minute run and my average effort was a 3, that's
Mhm.
150 exercise units. And so that's very nice to a very nice metric to have because it's working out your duration, but also the intensity.
Mhm.
Because some people can work on mileage and say, yeah, I ran 50 miles last week and then I'll do 55 miles next week.
Mhm.
But how fast are you running in that? How many hills are in there? How, how is if you're sleeping poorly, then your effort goes up. Like that same
Yeah.
speed will feel harder. And
Mhm.
so you're encapsulating a lot of the intricacies of that when you work in some sort of intensity mixed with the duration. So I come up with these exercise units. Even
Yeah.
now that I have my high rocks training, I'll be doing other things that aren't running. So I'll be doing a rower, I'll be
Mhm.
doing burpees, I'll be doing wall balls, I'll be doing lunges, and
Mhm.
I'll do a workout for 40 minutes and I'll be gassed.
Yeah.
I want to work out what my effort is. And so I'll say, okay, my average effort for that workout was a 5 out of 10. And I did 40 minutes. And so I can easily calculate those workout units,
Mm.
exercise units, and correlate that throughout the week as well. And so it tends to work. I find works pretty well, but people can use heart rate, heart rate
Mhm.
zones, their
Yeah.
average heart rate, or rank it that way if you wanted to. Some people use power if they're a runner and they have a foot pod that calculates their power because there are limitations for each and every one of these things. But find what works for you. I find that's really helpful for me, really easy to do. Um, build up my calculations at the end. On
Mhm.
Sunday, I've got a reminder in my phone to um, complete my spreadsheet of how many exercise units I've calculated throughout the week and making sure that's not too abrupt. And
Yeah.
yeah, I find it works really well.
That's awesome. Love that. I love tracking things. So yeah, I need to
You're
track
definitely a
more.
runner.
Yeah, I'm definitely a runner. I think so. I'm almost as addicted to it as you are. Um, maybe more. Who knows? I wanted to ask a business question relating to your business. Do you do group as well as one-on-one consultate? I don't that's not the right word, I don't think. So, or when people come to work with you as a physio, it would be just one-on-one, I guess, with their individual things that are going on. That's
Yeah,
not very
if it's
scalable. It's just my business head coming on.
true.
How do you scale that?
So the one-on-one physio kind of needs to be one-on-one
Yeah.
if you're making it physio and they're paying for a physio service.
Mm,
Um, it needs to be a one-on-one for confidentiality sort of
of course.
purposes.
Yeah.
And so, yes, there are limitations to that.
Mm-hmm.
But in and amongst that, yes, I know that's not scalable. I know that I don't want to put in more hours to get more money. And
Of
so
course.
I have teetered around with doing a PHT community group, which I've
Yeah.
started a few months ago. And so that's like an online community of people who have
Yeah.
listened to the podcast.
Yeah.
They're learning. They get half-hour sessions with me once a month to tailor things, but
Yeah.
then they're all sort of in this group together, sort of
That hyper
paying
niche.
a
Mm.
paying a subscription and like being a part of that
Yeah.
group community feel. And the other scalable things I'd like to do, which I'm still doing, are podcast ads,
Yeah.
YouTube. I'm spending a lot of time learning and building things up on YouTube because you can make some income that
Mm.
way. And I have a book, I have online courses teaching people about running. I have a
Mm-hmm.
lot of things that I'm just playing around with, knowing
Yeah.
that that's more scalable and that's more of something that I want to do so that in the future, if all of those start to pick up, I have some income and can spend a little bit less time seeing one-on-one clients, spend
Yeah.
more time with my family and that sort of stuff. So all of those are constant ideas that I always have and why sometimes I lose some sleep, but love the adventures and
Mm.
different ideas and seeing what works, what doesn't work and that sort of
The
stuff.
variety. Mm. Yeah, no, I love that. I just wanted to check in that you were doing. That was just my business coach head going on. What are you doing? You must be doing some other things as well. That would be really good. Like, and you should be doing something. And you are. So that's fantastic. Um, how long do you think you'll run for? Which just seems like a silly question often when I get to the end of these interviews, because
Yeah,
people have often waxed lyrical about how much they love their running.
it's something I've never thought about.
Mm.
I would like to continue running for as long as I can.
Mhm.
It's very inspirational to see people run marathons in their 80s, mid 80s.
It is amazing.
There's people like there's age groupers doing like track events and they're in their 90s and like
Crazy.
it's crazy to see, but so inspirational and like
Yeah,
why wouldn't I want to strive for that?
exactly. Why
Like
limit
I say,
ourselves?
nothing I really think about though. It's a hard question to
Mm.
answer if I've never really thought about it.
Mm. So as long as you can, basically.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah.
Can you imagine, Brodie, what your life would be like now? What would be missing from your life if you hadn't decided to do that half marathon with your sister? So what's
Um,
it given you? Obviously, it seems like your whole working life now
Yeah,
revolves
what
around it.
hasn't it given me is a better question. Like it's given me purpose, it's given me a mission, it's given me like a career that I want to continue to build upon and learn more from and teach more people about. Um, it's like it's set up my whole life, both like physically and like my career. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's given me everything really.
So amazing. It's awesome. So good to talk to you. A question that I ask everybody is before we end, is there anything about running that we haven't touched on that you want to share? I will ask you in a minute for some tips for beginner runners because I ask everybody that. But is there anything about running apart from, running tips for beginners that you would like to share before we wrap up?
Um, I think going back to more like the community thing,
Mm.
a lot of people that think running is a bit of a solo sport without ever
Mm.
really um, testing out what it's like in a group setting. I think a lot of people get a lot more passion just going to a weekend park run. That's how I started with like the community feel, and that's how I sort of moved more towards those trail run series because it's a bit of a smaller field, but everyone's just cheering each other
Yeah.
on. Like there's no um like
Hierarchy
egos
type thing. Yeah.
mixed in
Mm.
there. There's none of that. Sure, people do get competitive. Sure, you do want to chase
Mm.
down that person in front of you. But when you pass that person in front of you, they cheer you on. And then
Mm.
when someone passes you, you cheer them on. And like
Yeah.
it's just a really great environment. So if people are runners and they haven't explored that element yet, sure, it's not for everyone, but I
Mm.
at least would encourage people to give it a go, give it a try, see what it's like. Park runs are so accessible these days and
They
so
are.
easy.
And
Um,
everywhere.
and they're everywhere. So give that a try would be my
Yeah.
advice.
I love that. I got a friend who is doing the alphabet. I think she's only got E left in a park run. So I'm sure you're aware
Cool.
of all the games you can do with park run. So if anybody needs to gamify their their exercise, park run's a good one for that.
Excellent.
Um, before we wrap up, can you give me some tips for beginner runners? I'm sure people come up to you all the time and say, Brodie, I want to start running. Where would you point them in the first instance?
I would say have some sort of structure. I would say have some sort of obviously the big crux of it all is try not to do too much too soon, because that exceeds your adaptation zone, increases your risk of injury. And if you get injured in the first 4 weeks of you being a runner, you're most likely not going to pursue it or continue with it. Be patient. I would say you're still a runner, even if you're just walk running. Definitely do that. If you, depending on your fitness background, if you're a beginner runner, start with some walk runs. Start with, 1 minute of running, 1 minute of walking. Do that 10 times. Couch to 5K is a really nice program that people get involved with, and it is very sensible. It's, by the end of it, you're running 5K, which is a good achievement for a lot of people. So it's good goal, task specific. And just listen to your body. I'd say if you start getting soreness, if you start getting some knee discomfort, if you're waking up and you're getting pain underneath your heel or stiffness or those sorts of things, really pay attention to those and adjust your training accordingly. It just takes time for people to adapt, but you're laying a foundation. And once you have a strong foundation, it's a lot harder to, you can build a lot more. And so make sure that that's the case. A lot of people get a lot of injuries and run into a lot of setbacks, and that's only because they're doing too much too soon. So just really pay attention to that.
Don't get carried away. Take it easy to start with.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, Brodie, again, thank you big time for being on here. There's been so much goodies that you've thrown out there. I'll put all of those links into our show notes so that they can have a look and come follow you up. You'll probably end up with a whole bunch more followers on your podcasts and perhaps even a couple of patients. So thank you again. It has been really awesome to spend some time with you. Thank you.
Good to chat with you as well, Michelle. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for listening to the FitMIND FitBODY podcast. I'd love to talk to you about your running journey. Send me a message on Facebook or on the website and let's do it. I also wanted to let you know that I've created an email list so you won't miss any podcast episodes. You'll find details in the show notes and on the FitMIND FitBODY website, along with a bunch of resources on mindful running. They'll help you to get and stay mentally and physically fit. And I'll see you there. Plus, I'll be back here in your podcast player a few times a week. Hit subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And before you go, I'd really appreciate it if you would leave a review. It'll help more people to find the podcast and get inspired to start running and ultimately to improve their life. See you soon.